We were talking about rewilding earlier, and we're talking about rewilding, this idea that, you know, you allow things to grow, to sort of allow things to emerge that maybe have been lost, and to rediscover new species and things sort of emerging. But rewilding, as people point out, is actually a really careful process. It's not something you can't just kind of let a field rewild itself. You have to curate it, maybe plant some new things and do some research about what's going to work, etc. In other words, the structures and the intentionality is actually really important. What advice would you give to folk who want to begin maybe to start a mixed ecology or to develop a mixed ecology of church within the context that they're in?
A good question to start, if you're starting from a parish perspective, is to look at who's there on a Sunday and think about who isn't there. And then you kind of think, well, how are we going to reach those people? And it may be that they're in a geographical place that you're not reaching. They might be in a cultural place that you're not reaching. And very often that will mean you're going to need to try something new. And so then I would say, ask around, like in your diocese, in your chapter, in what's going on, is there someone that you can learn from? And I'm not saying like, is there something you can nick the idea of and just do it in your place? Because it's probably not going to be completely fit for where you are. But can you learn from people that have done it before? Can you hear from people their stories and take some inspiration from that about how you engage? Take time to listen to your community. Actually, what is it that people are wanting to engage with?
Listening and looking and seeing who's missing. It really opened my eyes to the sheer number of people who, even the people who say that they may be Christians, and Norfolk's probably 500,000, but 22,000 turn up to a Sunday service at best. So there's a lot of headroom to connect with people who are missing. And that's just the people who profess to have a Christian identity. I think patience is really important. We have people who are waiting and have been waiting for probably 2 years, who are part of a network, who we're just praying and waiting and watching and waiting. And I really just believe that God, he has his mission, and it's in his timing, and we don't always understand why, but we just wait, and we're participants. It's not all on us. We get to join in with the divine nature, and for me, that's been really significant. I always talk about it being kind of 99% wonder and 1% effort. That might, or 90% wonder and 10% effort. I know that might be wrong for everybody, but from an experience of leading Resource Church to then moving to almost kind of fully organic ministry, where there are no budgets to look at and no buildings to preserve, you really are just looking to see the fermenting of the Holy Spirit and whether God's going to do something somewhere, and then what you're meant to do to join in with it and who he's placed in one place.
I think just picking up on what you said there in terms of looking around at the people that you've got as well. For us, I never thought when we set up Fountains Church that we would end up with a wrestling church, for instance. But, you know, bizarrely, we had 3 professional wrestlers in our church, and one of those in particular was very keen on using that as a means to be able to share the good news of Jesus. I think that's another aspect to look at as you start to think about this. Who have you got? It's kind of a little bit like what have you actually got in your hand? What's there? And is there an opportunity for you to be able to do something different based on the people or the things that you've got?
And I think part of that is, who's the Lord calling? Who keeps knocking on your door and saying, yes, but what about? Because obviously the Lord has put it on their hearts. And I think it's easy as church leaders, isn't it, to think that we have to set the vision and we have to set the strategy. And yet the Lord's that we've been talking about it, the Lord's at work, and he's raising up leaders and he's giving them vision and them strategy. It doesn't always need to be led by the leader. It can be led bottom up. I know, my own experience for years, I was banging on about estates. Must have driven the guys at St. Bees mad about it. But it was what God was calling me to. And eventually I got released into it. And I think my frustration taught me to hopefully listen well to people, So we have a joke around ours that, if you come up with a good idea, we're just going to tell you to do it then. Do you know, because, you know, God hasn't given it to me, God's given it to you, so you go and do it, and how can we help you do it?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's key as well to think, like, historically, maybe we look for ideas that we thought were good, because maybe they looked like us and something we would do. And I think it's key more and more that you just see that calling, as you guys said. Like, who can you tell is like on fire for what they want to do, and then release them into that? Maybe especially if it's something that you wouldn't do yourself, because actually that's how the body of Christ works. Not everyone's going to do the same thing.
I find, though, in our context, because often our estates are viewed as sink estates, so people are unable to work there, and it's like almost the world has said you can't do anything and you're not worth anything. And so actually giving them that vision that God has made them for a purpose, so that they know that they're chosen and that they have purpose. And I think it's really interesting. One of the things that we've seen time and time again is that when people come to faith, they start really engaging in their community and wanting to grow their community and bless their community and be leaders in their community right from the word go. And I know a lot of people on our estate find it really odd that our community centre is led by residents, the majority of whom are now Christians. And it's just because they've come to know Jesus and then they want to do something. I think in our context that's really important, that they not only do the daily discipleship, but they have a view to the future and they have hope as well, because that's what the world has stripped them of, is hope that they can do something and that they are worth something.
That's really helpful. And I think coming from the context of busy, do more church, it's been really interesting seeing what happens if it's not all on us. What happens if it's not about saturating the diary with events and things and go big and go bold. And I think it isn't about doing nothing, but it is about responding to the thing that God's moving you into, which might be in your local community rather than at the sort of the church program, dare I say it, of where you're doing lots of things. And so we've seen people, their local area has come into focus more, and we're talking about, you know, villages where the little conversation over the hedge at the person next door would normally not get to feature in a big church setting. But actually this is a really significant thing, because that conversation's happened, and that's a step. It's brought into focus the small and the way that hearts are changing to take ownership of mission and their own, purpose and plans.
The way you two are reflecting on the differences in your context, almost your different starting points, given the different demographics maybe of the people, is really helpful. One other thread I'm sort of seeing emerging through this is that the hope is that mixed ecology affords different people and maybe new people an opportunity to grow in their faith, to practice their faith in new ways, to maybe serve as leaders. We might not use that language, but if we have simply sort of static categories or static forms, there's only so many people who get to play, to use the language you used earlier, whereas hopefully mixed ecology affords new opportunities. Is that what you're seeing? And how, if so, how do we sort of do that well?
I think part of the hope of it, isn't it? We often say you have to see it to be it. And with people leading smaller expressions of church, they maybe have a different skill set than somebody who needs to run something that is massive. And then the hope is then that people can see themselves in there. They can see themselves actually going to church. Or maybe it's as basic as they see somebody like them and therefore they know that Jesus is for them too. And I think that's important. I hear what you say, Phil, about training, but it still makes my heart sad that we are still training leaders. By and large, there's a few exceptions. Become, I'd want to say, is an exception, and there's some other ways of training estate leaders. But by and large, our training is still set up to train the leaders of those big battleships of churches. And yet we know that we need small boats to get in those places that the battleships can't get in. And how are we training those? And I would say that apprenticeship is a really good way of doing that. And I think so the challenge is, so for the small church leaders, who are they got with them and are they training up? But what structures can we put in place that makes that okay to do that? We've got a way to go yet. You know, let's champion what is going on, but let's keep pushing for some more change to happen there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Helen. I think we're still early doors compared to probably where some are at, but our oldest worshipping community, Saturday Gathering, which is probably about nearly 2 years old, we're starting to see what I would see as potential leaders emerge from there. And so what we're using is the kind of apprenticeship model. I put 2 people onto our rota the other day, and they were thrilled. But it was kind of an acknowledgement, actually, that they were playing a role now, which I don't think they ever thought that they would be able to do. And so it's putting those simple things in place, isn't it, that enable the growth of those individuals in confidence, rebuilding of damaged self-esteems, all of those kind of things. And I'm kind of really hoping that by the time my guys are ready to go into something which gives them a little bit more, there might be a broader expression of training that can be offered to them. We can obviously do a lot of stuff within our own environment, but ultimately you do want that leadership to be tested a little bit externally, because that's really helpful for them as well as helpful for you. So I'm really hoping that will be the case.